You've probably never heard of Studio Nexus. They co-created Chivalry of a Failed Knight, but besides that, they haven't worked on much besides an unaired episode of the MapleStory anime. Nevertheless, they managed to create a good and more importantly unique show in the form of Comic Girls, an anime about girls drawing manga together. Before I get into what makes it good though, I want to mention that it was constantly teetering on the edge of being generic. Besides the manga artist angle, many of the girls' interaction felt copy-pasted from the book of typical anime nonsense, but it set itself apart in a few important ways that made me actually like it. The first is visuals. Comic Girls has some damn interesting background art at times. I'm pretty sure a lot of them are just real-life pictures run through some sort of program, but it's cool as hell anyway. To me, this is what makes anime interesting. The many canvases through which the creators can visually adjust the presentation. Anime audiences have come to expect boring art in the background because beautiful drawings aren't easy or time efficient to create, and because it's in the background and potentially overlooked, it's one of the first things to suffer. But the backgrounds in Comic Girls prove that there are efficient ways to supplement the effort that goes into the hand-drawn that can still make it interesting. There were times when the background art really made the show feel aesthetic, true, but at other moments it was utterly boring, and that stands out against something visually interesting. If they were going to do this, why didn't they go all the way? It reminds me of that Photoshop effect where you take a real picture and make it look like an oil painting, but maybe it's not as simple as I'm making it sound. Anyway, Tatami Galaxy did something similar in its OP, and I think it works well here too. Another thing that keeps this show going is how it portrays the artistic struggle of someone that's pretty terrible at their art, but who bounces back from every rejection to improve. The very first scene is our manga artist Kaus getting an earful over the phone from her editor about how poorly her most recent work was received, even going as far as to tell her specific quotes from her unsatisfied readers while the poor kid is sobbing on the floor. You think she could have just sent her an email or something. It nearly goes without saying that this is where a lot of the comedy comes from in the show. When you're getting into a craft and you're new and you haven't been doing it since you were a kid like everyone around you, it's rough, man. There's a lot of failure and rejection involved, and Kaus constantly feels how inferior she is because she lives in a dorm with two other girls who have serialized manga and one who is much closer to having one than she is. Kaus is just shit on over and over and over again, and it's great. She represents the resiliency required to try and get good at something even in the face of constant failure. Every time she turns in her work, her editor's like, "It's not good. It's better, but not good. This part makes no sense, but you did improve, but no, sorry, it's rejected. Your characters all look the same and it's rejected." No instant gratification here. Onto the characters as a group. They aren't too archetypal. The Tom one's flat-chested, the athletic one is stoic, the lolly is a failure, and the gal girl's a lesbian. Furthermore, there was an actual group dynamic and sense of camaraderie between these artists that comes off as authentic. When Kaus first arrives at the dorms, she and Kyume discuss their issues as artists. Kyume can't draw boys and Kaus doesn't know how to write realistic dialogue to save her life. As someone that's tried to write short stories, this was relatable. I'll also praise this show for not getting too monotonous given its premise. There were times when I was tired of seeing them sitting in a circle drawing manga, but at those times something interesting usually happened to shake up the formula. The addition of Fura, a horror manga artist who added a touch of terror to the show, starting off episode 6 as a scary movie, did just that. The romance stuff between Kyume and Tsubasa was also a nice shake-up from the monotony, even though it didn't really go anywhere, and that's okay. It didn't have to. That's not the point of the show. I wish more anime or popular media in general would be willing to do this. A lot of times in life, romantic interest doesn't really lead anywhere, or at least not in a timely fashion. Sometimes romance doesn't follow a clean arc that coincides perfectly with the rest of the story, but I think it's still fine to show it. I'd rather see that than another forced love triangle anyway. However, even though I liked this show, I did have some problems with it. I get that this is a coming-of-age story and Kaus has it pretty rough, but she just won't stop crying. Crying, and again she's crying. We understand that your friends are all better than you at everything, but do you really need to cry all over yourself, your drawing tablet, and your phone again? This also feeds into the show's problem of being a little too dramatic. Remember how I just said Fur added variety to the show? Well, she's also the worst thing to happen to it. When she first appears, it's another good shake-up, and for a moment I thought, man, I haven't been bait and switched this hard since Madoka Magica. Turns out, though, that her personality is that she's a horror manga artist, so she's scary. That's it. She has a single heartfelt moment with Kaus, relating with her about feeling like an outsider, but after that, she kind of just keeps scaring the main girls over and over. I mean, you'd think they'd get used to it, or get tired of it? I certainly did. It would have been potentially interesting to explore her perspective, considering she mentions being successful with a niche audience, but alas, no such thing happened. Just a side note, Kyume got Jesus camped by her editor in Japanese society to only write straight romance, even though she's clearly gayer than those girls from Citrus. Speaking of Citrus, Kyume also has a borderline sexual assault streak in that episode where she goes shopping with Tsubasa, but I think it was deemed that dwelling on the significance of either of these events was too tonally dark for such an upbeat show. Anyway, the obligatory cabal of older girls in this anime aren't particularly interesting either. The best character of the three is the otaku teacher, who's memorable not because of her personality, but because she still looks kawaii in a high school uniform. The editor girl has the potential to be one of the most interesting characters because of her desire to see Kao succeed, conflicting with her need to be tough on her, but she doesn't end up showing up all that much enough for me to care when the waterworks start. In fact, I kind of feel like all of the crying and cheering each other on in this show is just a little bit too sweet and overdone. Yes, I realize this is par for the course, but unlike in other shows, I rarely felt like I knew the characters enough to tear up myself when they were. I think this is sort of what happens when you mix exploring the artistic struggle with too many miniature character dramas at one time. So, if you're looking for an anime that explores what it's like to be an artist with sometimes interesting visuals and characters, I've heard Honey and Clover is pretty good, but Comic Girls isn't bad either.